I've spent most of my life, both as an actress and a filmmaker, looking closely at silence, the kind that seeps into women's lives early, the kind that tells us certain thoughts are unthinkable, certain questions unaskable, certain parts of ourselves unlovable. And one of the deepest silences, I think, is the one around female desire. I don't mean romance, the way it's been commercialized and prettied up in every magazine and film. I mean raw, real, sometimes inconvenient longing. Wanting sex, pleasure, connection, not just emotionally, but physically, viscerally. It's a part of being human, but for women, it's been twisted into something shameful, a secret, a flaw, something to hide or apologize for. I remember growing up, watching the subtle rules being written all around me. Boys could talk about what they wanted. They could make jokes about sex and get nods of approval. Girls, well, we were supposed to be mysterious. Controlled, if we spoke too openly, we were vulgar. If we felt too much, we were damaged. And if we wanted something for ourselves without offering it as a gift to someone else, we were selfish. I didn't question these rules at first. I absorbed them quietly. I internalized the idea that my body could be desired, but should not have desire. When I started directing, I felt this shift. Behind the camera, I could finally start telling stories that didn't apologize. I could show women as whole people, wanting messy, strong, conflicted. I could explore sexuality without reducing it to spectacle. Still, I noticed something in conversations, this underlying discomfort when a female character was allowed to want something purely for herself. It threatened the way we're taught to think about good women. We're still so used to seeing female desire as something dangerous or something in need of redemption. But here's what I believe now: desire is not dirty. It is not something that needs to be cleaned up, toned down, or rewritten. It is not the opposite of dignity. It does not erase intellect or kindness or spirituality. In fact, desire connects us to ourselves, to our truth, in ways that nothing else can. It is not a betrayal of our values. It is part of our wholeness, and for women, embracing that truth is radical. It's healing. It's reclaiming something that was always ours, long before shame was taught to us. Because let's be honest, none of this guilt is inherent. Little girls aren't born ashamed of their bodies or their instincts. That shame is handed to us, wrapped in warnings and silence and sideways glances. But if we were taught to feel shame, we can also unlearn it. That process takes time. It's not about declaring yourself free overnight. It's about small moments of honesty, telling yourself the truth, even if you don't say it out loud yet. It's about allowing your body to be yours, not just something for others to view or use or judge. And it's about giving yourself permission to feel without guilt, without apology. You are not broken because you want more. You are not bad because you crave closeness, intensity, pleasure. You are not less worthy because your desires don't fit someone else's script. You are not a contradiction. You are a complete story. I've come to see female desire as a quiet form of rebellion. Not loud, not vulgar, just honest. And in a world that still tries to shame honesty, that's a kind of bravery, one that doesn't need permission, one that begins simply by knowing this: you were never meant to feel ashamed for being whole. And you never, ever were alone. I don't think any of us were born ashamed. That's something I've come to believe more and more the older I get. Shame isn't something that lives inside us naturally. It's planted, sometimes early, and then watered quietly over time. Especially in the lives of women, especially when it comes to our bodies, our feelings, our desires. There's a photo of me as a child, maybe 5 or 6, spinning barefoot in the grass, arms stretched wide, dress flaring. I'm laughing, completely unself-conscious. I remember that feeling: freedom, joy, a total lack of awareness of how I was being seen. That girl didn't yet know to feel embarrassed. She didn't know to cross her legs, cover her chest, mute her laughter, or bite her tongue. She hadn't yet learned what parts of her were too much, but that learning happens fast, and often it's invisible. It's not always a rule spoken out loud. It's the moment someone tells you your dress is too short or your laugh is too loud. The awkward pause when you ask a question about sex, the glance, the joke, the correction, the silence, it builds up slowly. Not all at once, but bit by bit, until one day you find yourself doubting your instincts, shrinking your presence, or feeling guilty for even having a body that wants things. And when you've lived like that long enough, shame starts to feel natural. It becomes part of how you move through the world, but it isn't, it never was. It was just something we were taught, sometimes by people who thought they were protecting us, sometimes by people who hadn't unlearned their own shame, sometimes by systems that benefit from our silence. When I made Stories We Tell, I remember realizing how deeply truth and silence can coexist in a single family. You can live in the same house, eat at the same table, and still carry things you don't feel allowed to speak. And the same is true in our relationship with ourselves. We can live decades in our own skin and still be strangers to the parts of us we've hidden, because someone else, somewhere along the way, told us those parts were wrong. But the truth is, if something was taught, it can also be untaught, and that's where our power lies, not in pretending shame was never there, but in noticing it, naming it, and deciding not to carry it anymore. There is nothing wrong with you for wanting love, for wanting touch, for being curious, for needing softness or intensity. There's nothing wrong with you for enjoying your body, or even just wanting to. And there's nothing dirty about your hunger for connection, for pleasure, for honesty. You weren't born to feel small. You weren't born to whisper your own name. And you certainly weren't born to spend your life apologizing for existing too vividly. This unlearning, it's quiet, it's personal, it's sometimes painful, but it's also deeply freeing, because once you start seeing shame as something given to you, not something you are, you start to realize you can hand it back. Not always all at once, sometimes in small moments, wearing what you want, saying what you feel, asking for what you need. And eventually, those small moments add up to a life where you can finally breathe in your own skin. You are not defective, you are not impure, you are not broken, you are simply human, and the fact that you were taught to feel otherwise, that's not your fault, but the choice to come home to yourself, that belongs to you. And it always has there's something deeply familiar about swallowing words. I think most women know what it means to rehearse a sentence in their heads, over and over, only to never say it out loud, to hold back a question, a no. A desire, a truth, because somewhere inside there's this learned belief that speaking up will cause discomfort or be misunderstood or make someone else see us differently, maybe even less. I used to believe that silence was a kind of protection, that keeping parts of myself hidden was safer, even noble. I thought quietness meant strength, that it spared others from discomfort or conflict. But the truth is, silence can become a prison, especially when it's expected, especially when it's demanded of us in subtle, everyday ways, through culture, media, relationships, or just the unspoken rules we're handed from girlhood. I remember being a young actress surrounded by adults who often assumed they had full access to my time, my energy, and sometimes even my body. I didn't have the words then, or maybe I did but felt too afraid to use them. I didn't know that I had a right to say no, a right to ask questions, a right to pause or to walk away. Back then, silence felt like the price of being accepted or liked or allowed to stay in the room. And what I've learned since is this: no one, not a partner, not a boss, not a system, deserves your silence when it comes at the cost of your dignity. There is nothing brave about making yourself small so others can feel comfortable. There is no glory in keeping your voice tucked away like it's something dangerous. Our voices are not weapons. They are instruments of clarity, of connection, of survival. Speaking doesn't mean shouting. It doesn't mean confrontation for the sake of it. Sometimes using your voice is just quietly, clearly saying, "I don't want this," or "I need something different," or even, "This is who I am." It doesn't always look dramatic, but it's always powerful. What no one tells you when you're young is that your silence can become someone else's comfort, but never your own, and the longer you stay silent, the more foreign your own truth starts to feel. Until one day, you don't even recognize the person who keeps saying yes when she means no, who smiles when she wants to scream, who disappears a little more each time she stays quiet, but it doesn't have to stay that way. You can begin again, even if your voice shakes, even if it feels too late. You can begin with something small, a sentence you never thought you'd say, a truth you've long carried, a boundary you finally set. And in that moment, you begin to return to yourself. You don't owe anyone silence, not the silence of politeness or survival or false harmony. You owe yourself honesty and freedom and the right to speak your truth, even if it makes the room uncomfortable. Because what's the point of peace if it costs your inner voice? This is not about becoming loud for the sake of noise. It's about becoming real, letting your voice catch up with your soul, and trusting that the people who are meant to walk beside you won't be scared away by your truth. They'll be drawn to it because it's rare, because it's necessary. I've learned through film, through motherhood, through healing, that our voices are not too much. They're not dangerous. They're not shameful. They are the bridges we build back to ourselves and to each other, and they deserve to be heard. I think a lot of us were raised to believe that love is supposed to complete us, that it's this magical thing we find outside ourselves, a person who fills the gaps, answers the questions, makes us whole, and in theory, it sounds beautiful. But in practice, I've found that love can be confusing when you've been taught that your worth depends on how much of yourself you're willing to give away. Especially for women, the stories we're told about love often come with a quiet warning: be kind, but not demanding. Be open, but not difficult. Be loving, but not too much. Don't want too much. Don't ask for too much. And above all, don't let love walk away. No matter the cost, I've lived through versions of this, where I thought being in love meant becoming smaller. Where I compromise, not just on preferences, but on values. Where I stayed silent just to keep peace. And in the beginning, I thought that was what maturity looked like, that making love work meant making myself disappear in small, subtle ways. But love that asks you to abandon yourself isn't love. It's performance, it's endurance, and over time, it chips away at your sense of self until one day you're left wondering where you went. There's this strange pressure to prove your worth by being endlessly adaptable, by folding yourself into whatever shape someone else needs. But if love only exists when you're quiet, agreeable, or invisible, then what you're calling love might actually be fear. I don't say that lightly. I know how hard it is to walk away from something that almost works. I know how easy it is to believe that your needs are too heavy, that your feelings are too loud, especially when you've spent years being praised for being the one who doesn't complain. The one who understands, the one who waits. But here's what I've come to believe. Love should feel like coming home to yourself, not leaving yourself behind. You are allowed to want a relationship where you don't have to translate your worth, where your needs aren't seen as flaws, where your joy doesn't make someone feel smaller, and where you don't have to twist yourself into something more manageable to be loved. I've seen women, friends, characters in my films, people I deeply admire, wake up to this truth later in life. There's grief in that awakening, but also immense freedom to realize that loving someone doesn't have to mean losing yourself, that the deepest intimacy often comes when you're brave enough to be fully, unapologetically you. And yes, love takes compromise, but compromise is not the same as erasure. Healthy love allows for two truths to exist in the same room. It allows for disagreement, for growth, for real conversation. And it doesn't collapse when you take up space. The love I believe in now, the kind I try to write, to live, to model for my children isn't about being chosen. It's about being seen, fully, messily, beautifully, and still being held with respect. You don't have to earn that kind of love by proving how little you need. You deserve it because you exist, because you're human, because you're worthy. So if you ever find yourself shrinking in the name of love, ask yourself, What would it mean to stay true to yourself instead? What would it look like to be in love and still be whole? The answer might change everything. And that's not the end of love. It's the beginning of something real, something that doesn't ask you to vanish, but invites you to fully arrive. For a long time, the idea of pleasure felt like something far away. Not forbidden exactly, but not meant for me, like it was something that lived in stories, in advertisements, in songs, something glossy and performative, something that belonged to women who were freer, braver, louder. Not to women who were trying to be good. I think many of us grow up believing that our bodies are meant to be managed, not lived in, that they're supposed to be controlled, quiet, acceptable, never too loud, never too visible, and certainly never demanding. We're taught early on that our value is in what we give: love, patience, forgiveness, care. But pleasure, our own pleasure, is rarely part of the conversation. When it is, it's either wrapped in shame or tangled in someone else's expectations. I used to believe that feeling good came last, after everyone else was okay, after the work was done, after the children were asleep, after I had proven myself useful. There's something insidious about the way women are conditioned to see joy as a luxury, something you earn, not something that belongs to you simply because you exist. But that belief does damage, quiet damage. It makes you numb to your own hunger. It teaches you that your body is not yours, that your joy is a negotiation, that asking for what you want, emotionally, sexually, spiritually, is somehow selfish or excessive. And eventually, you start to believe it. You stop asking, you stop wanting, or worse, you feel the wanting and punish yourself for it. But the truth, the radical, quiet, liberating truth, is this: pleasure is not something you have to earn. It's not something you have to justify. It's not something reserved for a select few. It is your birthright. Your body is not just a machine for productivity or caretaking. It's not just a container for your obligations. It is yours. It is living, sensing, responsive, and it is allowed to feel good, not just in fleeting, accidental ways, but deliberately, deeply, and often. This doesn't just mean sex, though that's part of it. It means breath, movement, taste, laughter, stillness, connection. It means living inside your body with a kind of reverence instead of with suspicion. It means saying yes to joy, not when it's convenient or deserved, but because you are alive, and that alone is enough. I've come to believe that reclaiming pleasure is one of the most subversive things a woman can do, because it requires dismantling all the quiet rules we were handed. It asks us to listen to ourselves, even when the world tells us to be quiet. It asks us to trust that our needs are not a burden, that our desire is not dangerous, that our joy is not a problem to be solved. When I talk to women, whether on film sets, in friendships, or in the quiet moments of storytelling, there's always a shift when someone says, without apology, "I want more," not in a greedy way, not in a grasping way, but in a way that says, "I have stopped pretending, I have stopped waiting, I am ready to feel fully, deeply, without shame. That moment is sacred, and it's yours. You do not need to explain why you want to feel alive. You do not need to defend your joy. You do not need permission to want more from your own experience of this life. Pleasure is not a reward for good behavior. It is a truth you were born with, and every time you honor that truth, you return to yourself a little more. You are not asking too much. You are simply remembering who you are. When I was younger, I didn't understand how much of our power lives in our relationship with desire. I thought power came from strength in the obvious ways: what we achieve, what we produce, how much space we take up in a conversation or on a screen. But as I've grown older, as I've become a mother, a filmmaker, a woman slowly unlearning shame, I've come to understand that the real power, the quiet, sustaining kind, lives in what we choose to want and whether or not we feel allowed to want it out loud. Desire, for women, has always been a complicated thing. It's monitored, doubted, suppressed, turned into spectacle, then punished for being visible. We're allowed to be wanted, but not always to want. We're allowed to be loved, but not to name the shape of the love we need. Desire in its truest form, not performance, not strategy, but real hunger, longing, curiosity, is something we're often taught to fear. Because a woman who wants things for herself, not as a reaction to someone else, is a woman who can't be controlled. And for systems built on silence and obedience, that's terrifying. So we are taught to shrink, to numb, to disappear into roles that feel safe and noble. We're taught to call ourselves empowered while still negotiating our worth through someone else's gaze. I've done it. I've accepted less than what I needed and told myself that was maturity. I've swallowed truths and called it kindness. I've performed satisfaction, not because I felt it, but because I didn't want to seem difficult. And then, slowly, I began to question why. Why did wanting make me feel dangerous? Why did joy feel indulgent? Why did desire come with guilt instead of grace? The answers weren't personal. They were historical, cultural, structural, and once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. Reclaiming desire wasn't just about pleasure or confidence. It was about power. It was about telling the truth in a world that had long asked me to lie about what I needed. So much of my creative life has been about giving space to women's inner lives, to the things they feel but rarely say. Because I think that's where our freedom begins, in saying it, in naming the want, in allowing ourselves to be fully, unapologetically human. Messy, yes. Contradictory, yes. But real, fully here. Reclaiming desire means saying, I don't exist to make you comfortable. I don't exist to be chosen. I don't exist to be pleasing at the expense of being whole. I exist to feel, to move, to create, to connect. And I get to decide what that looks like. I get to define what fulfillment means for me. That is power, not the kind that shouts or dominates, but the kind that roots you in yourself so deeply that you no longer need to be small to be safe. A woman who knows what she wants and knows she's allowed to want it cannot be manipulated easily. She will not barter her dignity for crumbs of affection. She will not twist herself into silence just to be allowed to stay. I don't think desire ever really leaves us. It waits, sometimes quietly, sometimes urgently, beneath the surface of all the roles we've played. And when we turn toward it, even slightly, we start to remember the parts of ourselves we had to hide to survive. Reclaiming desire isn't selfish, it's sacred. It's how we come back to the truth of who we are. And the world needs more women who have come home to themselves, not just for their own sake, but because their courage gives permission to others. This is how change begins, not with noise, but with truth. Not with control, but with freedom.